Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Spring training has arrived, people, and hope springs eternal for the fan bases of all 30 Major League Baseball teams. The crack of the bat, the pop of a ball hitting the glove, the chatter of teammates taking infield practice. These sounds are what I think of when people ask me what my favorite things are about spring. It's not the flowers blooming, it's not the leaves returning to the trees, because the coming of spring means the return of pollen, and that means I won't be able to breathe normally again until close to Halloween. But the pollen could never diminish the excitement and joy I feel every year when the teams return to the baseball diamond. And the players and fans buckle in for a 162-game ride that hopefully leads to a World Series championship. But enough about spring training. Let's talk about today's book. And first, there is something special about today's episode, listener. You remember at the end of the last episode that I said I was going to be having lower back surgery. Well, that happened on February 5th. I had to get the L4 and L5 vertebrae in my lower spine fused together. So I've been recovering at home since a few days before my last episode was released. And the recovery has been going pretty well. I've been mostly resting in bed. I am allowed to get up and move around for a few minutes every hour. That means walking a few laps around the kitchen and dining room areas of the house. And I can sit in a hardback chair for 15 to 20 minutes at a time before my back starts to get sore, and then I have to either move around or lie down again. That means that for this episode, I had to write, record, edit, encode, and upload in 15 to 20 minute chunks over about 40 to 50 different times over the last 10 days. It made for a really strange and frustrating, but a really fun recording experience. But, listener, you didn't tune in to hear about my convalescence. No, you want to hear about today's book. It's the second of the 1983 Lando Calrissian adventures. Having survived a near disaster in the Rafa system, Lando and Vufi Ra travel to the Oseon sector. The gambler continues to try and make his fortune at the sabacc tables, but he's once again forced into breaking the law by another shady system administrator. This time, Lando is forced to deliver a shipment of spice to a rich recluse, but of course, there's more to this courier assignment than meets the eye. It's Lando Calrissian and the Flamewind of Oseon by L. Neil Smith, and I'll talk about the book in just a few minutes. But first, it's listener question time. I have 2 emails today. The first comes from L, who says, I've been listening to the podcast for at least 2 years, and I love it. If you have one, which is your favorite Sith and why? Well, thank you for the email, L, and thank you for the very kind words. My favorite Sith is Darth Vader. He is one of my 2 or 3 favorite characters in the entire saga. Now, that might seem obvious, L, but I'm not sure folks really understand what I mean by that answer. When I say I'm a huge fan of Darth Vader, personally, I do not include Anakin Skywalker in that opinion. I know they're the same person, but I don't find Anakin Skywalker that interesting. For the most part, he's a well-intentioned young man who wants the best for the people he loves. He feels frustrated by the existing structure and the rules in place that he sees as impediments to achieving his goals, and who is willing to make decisions that hurt people as long as he gets what he wants. Everyone else be damned. That's just not the type of character I find interesting. But once Anakin becomes Vader, to me, that's when the character becomes interesting. Don't get me wrong. Vader is terrifying. Vader's powerful. Vader is really, really cool. But the main thing about Vader is that when it comes to something important, and I mean really important, like saving Padme's life, finding the Death Star plans, stopping the destruction of the Death Star, eliminating Leia, and capturing Luke Skywalker and turning him to the dark side. I mean, really, really, really important things. When it comes to any of those, Vader always fails. Always. Think about it. Vader achieved the power that he wanted. He helped bring peace to the galaxy in some form. But he's miserable. He's tortured. He can look at everything he had to sacrifice in order to help bring about the change he wanted in the galaxy. He's not quite the dog that finally caught the car, but he's close. And the interesting part to me is how it took him decades to come to terms with the things he did. And I don't just mean accepting what he did, but accepting it and realizing that even with all those horrible things that he did, and what they allowed the Empire to do, what they allowed Palpatine to do to the people of the galaxy, Vader still had the ability to do something good. He could save his son from suffering the same fate that he suffered, and he could remove the evil from the galaxy that was Emperor Palpatine. Thanks again for the email, Elle. Today's second email comes from Kiana, who says, I love your show. My brother-in-law showed it to me, and I can't get enough. I've been a fan of Star Wars for years now, but I just learned about Legends. I'm very excited, but to be honest, I'm not sure where to start reading. What do you think? Well, Kiana, I like to say that Legends has something to offer any Star Wars fan. If you ever want some suggestions, send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com, and we can go over your favorite things in Star Wars. Do you prefer stories about Jedi and Sith? Do you prefer stories about non-Force users? Do you have a preferred time period that you would like to hear stories about, be it the Old Republic time period or the Galactic Republic just before the Empire takes over? Do you prefer the Imperial time period? Or do you want to know some of the stories that take place after Return of the Jedi and moving forward? Legends has all of these. So shoot me an email. We can go over some of your favorite topics, and we can probably narrow it down. And if I can't, I can always shoot an email to one of my friends, Thomas, the co-host of the TK331 podcast. He's read every single Star Wars story in Legends, including the stuff that I don't read, like the comics, the short stories, etc. Anyway, Kiana's email continues. I'm wondering if you agree with some fans, including me, that the sequel movies are just pieces of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy that they mushed together to make the sequels. What do you think? Well, thank you for the question, Kiana. So, I agree with you, and I disagree with you. There are a few things in the sequel trilogy that are a little too on the nose for me. The main example being Starkiller Base. I mean, when The Force Awakens even includes a joke about Starkiller Base being another Death Star, and then you have the trench run hitting one specific spot to destroy the planet. Yes, for me, that is a little too much on the nose, like the original Death Star. And while I would have preferred a different villain than the First Order, I don't agree with people who think that the First Order is too close to the Galactic Empire of the original trilogy. Because that's what happens in the real world. Every generation, somewhere in the world, there are authoritarian regimes that seize power when people stop believing the government is working for them. And it takes time, but eventually the people overthrow those authoritarian regimes and the cycle begins again. But I understand the people who say the First Order doesn't work for them. I am interested, Kiana, to find people like yourself that think the sequels repurpose some of the things from the prequels. Because when the sequel movies came out, Disney CEO Bob Iger specifically said that when they bought the franchise and wanted to make more movies, they wanted to distance themselves from the prequels as much as possible because of the reception that the prequels got. I wonder if I'm in the generation older than you, Kiana. I just turned 47 years old, and I remember how much hatred the prequels got from some Star Wars fans when they were released, particularly The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I'm one of them. Now, I say that, I've never screamed and hollered or ranted about the prequels. And I would never tell people what they should like and what they shouldn't like. That's just not me. But I know a ton of people who did. I love the fans who love the prequels. I love that they love those movies. I'm just not one of them. Those films do not work for me. In fact, even though I'm not a big fan of the sequel trilogy either, I think the first two sequel films, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I like them better than any of the three prequel films. But to get back to your original question, Kiana, yes, I do think there are some specific moments in the sequels that are too much of a repeat of things that were in the earlier trilogies. I just don't think there are as many as some fans think. Once again, thank you very much for your email. Now, listener, if you'd like to ask me a question or if you want a book recommendation, Kiana, send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, just record a short message and email it in. Just please record it in MP3 audio format. Now, stick around for the end of the show because I have an email to share from a listener who has some opinions about a few of the Legends books that I have covered over the years. You'll want to stay tuned for that. But now it's time for today's book, Lando Calrissian and the Flamewind of Oseon by L. Neil Smith. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins on the planet Dilanexia 23. Lando and Vufi Ra have sold their haul of the life crystals that they got from the Rafa system, but the gambler just can't seem to find a steady enough income to make money transporting cargo. And besides, he'd much rather make money playing sabacc. And it's during one of those games where Lando receives an invitation from the administrator of the Oseon system. Lob Dolaf wants the gambler to join the sabacc game with several of the wealthy inhabitants of the Oseon asteroid belt. Lando jumps at the invitation. Playing a bunch of rich fat cats will allow Lando to rub elbows with the most influential members of the system and allow him to refill his purse. Lando and Vufi Ra leave Dilanexia 23 en route to Oseon 6845. Hopefully, Lando thinks, the two can try to figure out who's been trying to kill him before they get there. On the way to Oseon 6845, a small explosion rocks the Millennium Falcon. Vufi Ra is still able to land the freighter, and Lando leaves the little droid to effect repairs when he heads off to meet Lob Dolaf for the sabacc game. Vufi Ra begins fixing the hull when it discovers the explosion was no accident. It was a bomb. And what's more, there's a second one attached to the ship. The droid and Lando were just lucky that the second one had not detonated along with the first. At the sabacc table, Lando rakes in a small fortune. Lobduluf and his compatriots are amiable, likable table mates, but they're not very good sabacc players. Rather than ruin a good thing, Lando decides to start taking it easy on the other players. He lets them win the smaller pots, chats about everything going on in the Oseon system, and limits himself to only winning the pots that are large enough for his purse to grow at a small, controlled pace. After a few hours, Lando gets a call that the Millennium Falcon is on fire. He races back to the spaceport, but the ship is fine. Lando tries to reach Vufi-Ra on the comm, but the little droid doesn't answer. Just then, Lando is attacked, struck in the back by a titanium pipe. The blow knocks Lando to the ground, and quickly the unknown assailant jumps on him, trying to wrestle away the gambler's blaster. The two roll around on the ground a bit, but Lando eventually gains control of the weapon and fires, killing the other man. Lando and Vufi-Ra report the attacker and claim Lando reacted entirely in self-defense. Lobduluf and his chief security officer, Basi Voba, agree Lando will not face murder charges. But unfortunately, the Oseon system does have a strict no blasters law. Violating that law is punishable by death. Lando is brought in front of Lobduluf, who offers the gambler a deal. Be a part of an off-the-book sting or face execution for carrying a blaster. Of course, Lando agrees to the deal. Duluf says, "There's a very rich man named Bahua Mutda who lives on Oseon 5792, who gets a shipment of Lasai spice delivered every year when the Flamewind comes to the asteroid belt." Now, what's the Flamewind? An annual radiation storm that bathes the Oseon system in waves of colors. The 3-week event is beautiful, and it attracts thousands of tourists every year. The catch: the Flamewind causes significant sensor and communications interference and makes travel through the Oseon system extremely hazardous. Because of the danger, travel during the Flamewind is illegal. Duluf says that Mutda uses the cover of the Flamewind to get his spice delivered every year, and it's time to stop it. Duluf says Lando will fly Basi Voba and an Imperial narcotics agent named Wewa Phibot to Oseon 5792. Lando will deliver the spice to Mutba, and after the exchange takes place, Voba and Phibot will arrest the oligarch. The Falcon heads sunward to the 5th belt of the Oseon asteroid field, when suddenly it's attacked by a ragtag group of starfighters. Lando and Vufi-Ra fly through the asteroids, evading turbolaser bolts and destroying 2 of the attackers. Still, the Falcon takes a few hits, but Lando is able to land the ship in the crevice of one of the larger asteroids to hide and to begin repairs. The next day, the 4 finish their trip to Oseon 5792. Lando and the package of Lasai spice are taken in front of Mutda. Once the exchange takes place, the 2 police officers burst in to arrest him. But the rich man doesn't seem surprised, to the point that Lando starts to think that something isn't right here. He sees Mutda nod his head, and then watches Phibot turn his blaster and shoot Voba through the head. Lando turns back to Mutba, and the man admits he knew about the sting. He paid off Phibot to protect him once the spice was delivered. And now that he's completed his orders, the rich man says he no longer needs the narcotics agent. Mutba pulls out his own blaster and shoots Phibot, killing him. Now it's just Lando and Mutba, and the gambler knows his time is quickly running out. However, Mutba doesn't just turn his blaster and kill Lando. The rich man just starts talking about his wealth, the Flamewind, and the galaxy. As he speaks, Lando watches Mutba start to change. His form becomes hazy, and he eventually morphs into someone else. It's Rokur Gepta, the sorcerer of Tund from the Rafa system. Gepta says he killed the real Buhua Mutta and manipulated the situation in the Oseon system to entrap Lando. And now, the sorcerer plans to take his revenge. Gepta straps Lando down and begins to invade his mind. He shows Lando some of the scariest moments of his life: losing his mother in a store as a toddler, losing an important card game as a teenager, being imprisoned naked and repeatedly sprayed down with a fire hose. Lando doesn't just relive these memories, he feels them all again, much more acutely. Gepta calls this torture by chagrin, and he plans to use it to kill the gambler slowly, very slowly. While Gepta has his fun torturing Lando, the sorcerer forgets about the Flamewind. The radiation continues blowing through the asteroid field, and soon it hits Oseon 5792 full on, and with it, the remaining starfighters from the group that attacked the Millennium Falcon. The fighters strafe Mutta's compound. The blasts knock Gepta off his feet and give Lando the opportunity to escape. The gambler sprints back to the Millennium Falcon. He and Vufi-Ra take off, escaping Rukar Gepta and landing themselves right in the middle of a dogfight. But the old beaten-down fighters are no match for the Falcon. Lando shoots down 3 of the attackers and damages the last one. The story ends with Lando and Vufi-Ra capturing the final fighter and rescuing the pilot. The man calls himself Klin Shanga, one of the few survivors of the planet Renatasia. Shanga says his world was destroyed by Vufi-Ra. Lando is stunned, but the little droid confirms Shanga's story. However, Vufi-Ra says that's not the whole truth. The droid says it was programmed to trick the technologically primitive Ranatasians into allowing Vufi-Ra and its master to bring them into the galaxy-wide empire. Of course, that just led to the empire stripping the planet of its natural resources and wiping out 2/3 of its population. Time to take a break. When we return, I'll talk more about Lando Calrissian and the Flamewind of Oseon. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me take a moment and recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Thrawn is a story full of smugglers, pirates, and political infighting. See how the brilliant Chiss tactician climbed his way up the ranks of the Imperial Navy, with a little help from his reluctant aide, Eli Vanto. Check out Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today I'm talking about the novel Lando Calrissian and the Flamewind of Oseon by L. Neil Smith. This is the 3rd or 4th time that I'm reading the Lando Calrissian adventures, and this story has always had, to me, one of the stranger endings. One of the things I've always thought about these stories, yes, when they were originally published, they were published separately back in 1983. I did not get my hands on the Lando Calrissian adventures until sometime in the middle to late 90s. When I got them, they were published as one book. And to me, this one specific story reads like the second act of a 3-act story. I'm wondering if I could ever speak with the author, L. Neil Smith, if that's the way he wrote them. Because all 3 stories are connected. That connecting tissue is Vufi Ra and Roker Gepta. And when I say connected, I don't mean they're just like episodes of a TV show. What I mean is all three stories, they seem like part of one big story, in my opinion. And like I said, the ending of this story just seems odd. Once again, we have Lando, the gambler, the con man, getting conned himself into performing some sort of action that the legal authorities of the space system that he finds himself in cannot legally perform by themselves. In Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, Lando is tasked with breaking into basically an ancient ruin to try to find and steal an artifact for the leadership of the Rafa system. Here, because inter-system and intra-system travel is illegal during the Flamewind, Labdaluf can't just send his security forces to arrest Buha Mutta when the oligarch gets his illegal spice delivered, because that would be the authorities breaking the law as well. So, Daluf knows about Lando Calrissian from what he's heard about what happened in the Rafa system. He contacts the gambler and uses the blaster charge to entrap Lando into becoming the transport and delivery person during the Flamewind. One thing we learn reading the story, after Roker Gepta comes out of hiding, shows himself to Lando, is that Gepta has manipulated this entire situation. The Sorcerer of Tund fed information to Lab Daluf without Daluf knowing where the information came from about Lando Calrissian, about how the gambler could be manipulated into becoming this spice courier for Daluf. Gepta is the one who had the explosive devices installed on the Falcon, but not with the intention of blowing the ship up, because the sorcerer wanted to torture Lando slowly. So he had these devices rigged onto the Falcon to cause enough damage that the Falcon would have to sit down somewhere to effect repairs. And Gepta manipulated the situation to where that spot was the Oseon system. Gepta knew about Mutta's spice deliveries. He went to Oseon 5792, killed the oligarch, and then used his magical powers to impersonate Mutta, and thus entrapping Lando Calrissian. It's an interesting plan. If you sit there and think about it for a long time, there's a lot of moving parts. Some of it may not match up entirely, but it is at least plausible that everything Roker Gepta put into motion would land Lando and Vufi Ra in the Oseon system and eventually get Lando to Oseon 5792 and Mutta's estate. Again, if you think about it logically, maybe it doesn't match up 100%, but it's at least close enough for me that the rationality does mostly work. So I'm fine with that. The more interesting part of the story is the squadron of fighters that attack the Millennium Falcon when they are on their way to Oseon 5792. Because they weren't sent by Roker Gepta. They're a wild card. These fighters are described in the text as extremely old, as pretty run down. It's honestly sort of a miracle that these fighters are actually flying. And for the pilots to be flying through the Flamewind, they must be desperate. Who are they? Why are they attacking the Falcon? Of course, we don't learn this until the end of the story, when the rest of the squadron, having been destroyed, Lando and Vufi Ra are able to capture the last fighter after it's been damaged and can't fly. When they bring the pilot on board, Lando is curious as to whether or not he has angered someone else, or if these are just more agents of Roker Gepta. But the pilot, Klin Shanga, doesn't really pay Lando any attention. He screams and points at Vufi Ra, calling the little droid the destroyer of his world, Ranatasia. It stuns Lando. Of course, Vufi Ra, his programming precludes the little droid from causing harm to any organic life. How could Vufi Ra be the destroyer of a world? Well, it turns out Vufi Ra wasn't exactly the destroyer of Ranatasia, but the droid was programmed to try to convince the technologically primitive Ranatasians to accept help from off-world in the form of the Galactic Empire, to try to bring the world up to the technological standards of the rest of the galaxy. The droid was programmed to basically convince the population that they should allow the Empire to help them modernize at the cost of allowing the Empire, give them a few mining rights. Give the Empire access to some of Ranatasia's natural resources. Of course, those of us who have read or watched or heard any stories about the Galactic Empire, we know that the Empire doesn't really have an altruistic bone in the entire organization. Once they were given access to Ranatasia, they basically bled the planet dry of natural resources. When the people tried to fight back, the book says that 2/3 of the planet's population was killed. And the last third was left in ruins, many of them taken into imperial slavery. Shanga says that they vowed to find Vufi Ra and destroy it. This story stuns Lando, and honestly, it shocks the reader. knowing what the reader knows about Vufi Ra. And it's even more shocking when Vufi Ra confirms it. Yes, I did these things. I helped bring about Ranatasia's destruction. And then that's where the book ends. And that's why I say the ending has never felt right to me. It doesn't feel like the end of an actual book. It feels like the end of an act in a 3-act story. It's a cliffhanger. It's a thread that the reader knows will have to be picked back up in the final book of the series. Like the first story, The Mind Harp of Sharu, this story, The Flamewind of Oseon, is a short, fast adventure story. I prefer this second one, even with the strange ending, because it doesn't have any of that weird time/reality bending plot lines like The Mind Harp of Sharu does. This one is more of just a straight mystery / almost film noir-esque story. Lando and Vufi Ra know someone is trying to kill them. They're trying to figure it out, but still Lando's trying to make money, and now they've been enlisted in this sting operation. I prefer that type of story to some of the weird mind-bending elements of the first story, The Mind Harp of Sharu. And it's been quite a while since I've read it, but I believe the final book, Star Cave of Thunbaka or Thunboka, I've heard it pronounced both ways, I think it's more strange and weird, similar to the first story, The Mind Harp of Sharu. But we'll see once we get there. Listener, it's almost time to go. But before I do, let me share an email I received from Dawson, who has some opinions on some of the stories I've covered on the podcast. Dawson says, I read Maul Lockdown and wanted to get your thoughts on a theory I have. Based on the description of the opponent in Maul's first fight at Cog Hive 7, it sounds like he may have been fighting a Yuuzhan Vong warrior. The story says several times that it's an unidentified species that none of the prison's analytical systems or tests can identify. It also speaks in a language that no one, including the droids at the prison, can understand. The Thing is covered in ritualistic scars, tattoos, and piercings. It also says the being had organic armor plates, and that its arms seem to have come from 2 different organisms, with one being a spider-like claw for slashing and cutting, and the other being a blunt knuckle-like hammer for crushing. It even tries to take one of Maul's teeth and insert it into its own mouth during the fight. It's described as systematically violent and kills several other inmates on the voyage into the prison. Lastly, and most compelling, is its organic snake-like staff weapon that it uses during the fight with Maul to blind him. This sounds like the amphistaffs described in the New Jedi Order. I'm not 100% sure how the timeline works, but this could have been during the very first foray of the Vong into the galaxy, right around the time Vergir would have left with them. Curious to hear your thoughts on this theory. Well, Dawson, I like your theory a lot. I don't know about it occurring at the same time as the events of Rogue Planet with Vergir and Zonama Sikot. I think the events of Maul Lockdown take place after that, but you are probably right. It probably was a Yuuzhan Vong warrior. Dawson continues. Second, I have a correction to a question you got during your New Jedi Order coverage in regards to ship physics in Star Wars. In the question, the examples they'd given stated a ship couldn't jump to hyperspace due to the gravity well of a planet, to which you went to the scenes from the movies and confirmed that this was not mentioned. However, I just recently finished reading Heir to the Empire and discovered they do in fact state that ships need to escape the gravity well of Merkur to make the jump to hyperspace. This occurs toward the very end of the book, page 374 in my paperback copy, and it occurs when the Millennium Falcon is leaving the planet on their way to the Sluis Van shipyards. Well, Dawson, this is one of the times where the screen overrules what's in the books. Yes, you are correct. In Legends, ships could not make the jump to light speed until they escaped a planet's gravity well. But that's just it. That's Legends. In canon, that's not a thing. And if it ever was a thing, it's no longer a thing. The events of The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker show that ships can make the jump to hyperspace while still in a planet's gravity well. It's another case of whatever is on the screen in Star Wars trumps whatever is in the books. Once again, Dawson, thank you very much for your opinions. Now, listener, if you have something you'd like to share with me, an opinion, a question, a character grouping, or a comment you'd like me to read on the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. Now, coming up on the next episode, we wrap up the Lando Calrissian adventures with the third and final book, Lando Calrissian and the Star Cave of Thunbaka by L. Neil Smith. Now, that episode is scheduled for release on March 7th, as long as my recovery from surgery keeps going along as well as it has so far. If you want to see the full schedule for 2025, listener, check out the posts that are pinned to my Blue Sky and Twitter pages, and you can see all the books I plan to read for the rest of the year. Once again, thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Moats. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.